about. So let's not talk about hypocrisy in this room. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland. You have the floor,
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by thanking Special Envoy Geir Pedersen and, of course, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths for their briefings and, above all, for their commitment. And this is one of your last meetings or last in-person meeting on the Council, Martin. I would like to thank you most sincerely on behalf of my country for all of your humanitarian commitments, and particularly with regard to Syria. I have personally had the opportunity to work with Martin in a number of capacities, and particularly, especially intensely in the last year and a half on Syria. And I very much appreciate the fact that we were able to work together after the earthquake. So thank you. You have always encouraged the Council to act for humanity and in defense of those most in need. So we wish you all the best for the future. I cannot imagine that you are truly retiring, but in any case, thank you, Martin, once again. Along with the Special Envoy, Switzerland remains very concerned about the lack of progress towards a political solution in Syria, particularly regarding the implementation of Resolution 2254 and the step-by-step approach proposed by the Special Envoy. It is regrettable that the momentum to relaunch a viable political process and dialogue between regional players initiated in the aftermath of the tragic earthquake of February of last year has faltered. It was truly an opportunity that we hoped could be seized. In this respect, we will continue to be ready to make our good offices available in Geneva for any initiatives or peace talks under the auspices of the UN. The most important issue is the urgent need for a political solution in Syria in line with Resolution 2254. The establishment of a nationwide ceasefire is a fundamental milestone in the resolution to consolidate peace. In view of the hostilities that continue to affect various parts of the country, such a ceasefire is more necessary and urgent than ever. For this to happen, Syrian territory must also be protected from the spread of the conflict in the Middle East. With a view to lasting peace, Switzerland will continue to support the work of the UN and civil society organizations to ensure that the serious violations of international law committed since 2011 do not go unpunished, because there can be no peace without justice in Syria. Mr. President, allow me now to turn to humanitarian issues. Over the past year, the humanitarian situation in Syria has deteriorated further, and armed violence has continued across the country and even increased. Switzerland reiterates its call on all parties to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law, particularly with regard to the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, as well as humanitarian access. In this regard, it is to be welcomed that the authorization for the UN to use the Bab al-Salam and al-Raya crossings has been renewed for 3 months, and we are very grateful for this. Humanitarian actors, however, need greater predictability to plan their activities, especially with increasingly dwindling resources. Humanitarian access must never be limited in time. We reiterate that all aid modalities, including cross-border and cross-line aid, are necessary to meet the enormous needs in the country. Allowing and facilitating the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian aid to populations in need is an obligation under international humanitarian law, incumbent not only on all the parties to the conflict, but also on all states. 16.7 million people in Syria are in need of humanitarian assistance, including nearly 13 million suffering from food insecurity. As financial resources dwindle and needs increase across Syria, the international community's response must not be limited to emergency humanitarian aid. More sustainable humanitarian action, including early recovery projects, is essential to increase people's resilience and improve their living conditions, as well as give them economic prospects for the future. We know that the consequences of the Syrian crisis are weighing heavily on the countries of the region. That is why at the Brussels conference, Switzerland pledged over 65 million US dollars for the current year to help people in need in Syria and in the region. And we will deliver on these promises. Despite the many deteriorating humanitarian contexts, we cannot forget the plight of the Syrian people, but it is clear that in order to assist with these humanitarian needs, a political solution is necessary. And here I'd like to say to the Special Envoy, in responding to his wish, that we will certainly work with you on the way forward. Thank you very much, President.
Representative of Switzerland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+, namely Guyana, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, and my own country, Algeria. We would like to thank Mr. Peterson and Mr. Griffith for their valuable briefings. We recognize their tireless effort despite the myriad of challenges to bring the Syrian crisis to an end and alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people. Let me add my best wishes for an early recovery of Mr. Griffith. The international community and the Security Council and the United Nations needs talented people like you. Talented people, but also dedicated to the cause of humanity. Mr. President, since our last meeting, all indicators, including security, political settlement, including security, political, humanitarian, economic component, continue to trend downwards for Syria. Despite misgiving that the parties have not been able to agree to a political settlement, there is still space to restart the process. In light of this, the A3+ would like to offer the following recommendation. First, the parties to the conflict must commit to reconvening the Constitutional Committee. The agreement to hold the 9th session of this committee must be fulfilled. Progress on the political track is indispensable for the plethora of pending issues. The A3+ calls upon all parties to constructively engage in finding a political solution to guarantee Syria's unity, Syria's territorial integrity, Syria's sovereignty. Second, we urge all refugees hosting countries to respect international law, in particular international refugees law. Conditions must be created to facilitate the voluntary, dignified, and safe return of Syrian refugees and IDPs to their home. Third, we reiterate our call for a Syrian-owned, a Syrian-led political process under the auspices of the United Nations, in accordance with Resolution 2254. We therefore express our strong support to the effort of the Special Envoy and urge the parties to the conflict to engage in the Special Envoy's confidence-building initiative. Fourth, we firmly condemn the violation of Syria's sovereignty and call upon all actors to refrain from actions that trigger further escalation in the region. The A3+ is seriously concerned about escalation and miscalculation from the Gaza conflict and the impacts it could have on the stability and peace of Syria and the region as a whole. Mr. President, after more than 13 years of crisis, the humanitarian needs of Syria and the Syrian people are constantly growing due to the conflict, due to economic recession, and due to unilateral sanctions imposed on Syria. The A3+ regrets that the 2023 humanitarian response plan is currently only 31% funded, only 21% funded. The lack of adequate funding has disrupted humanitarian activities, with 13 million Syrians in need of life-saving support. We welcome the convening of the 8th Brussels Conference on supporting the future of Syria and the region, held in Brussels on 27th May 2024, and urge all donors to fulfill their commitment. The A3+ emphasizes the importance of the early recovery project vision of OCHA and calls upon all parties to collaborate with the UN system to ensure its success. The Syrian economy must also recover. Syrians cannot rely solely on the generosity of donors and humanitarian assistance. Economic sanctions must be lifted. The A3+, namely Guyana, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, and Algeria, calls for a genuine political process that addresses all challenges facing Syria today and helps the Syrian people meet their legitimate aspiration. All efforts should be aligned toward this objective, far from narrow political interest and calculation. It is our duty to the Syrian after years of suffering. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Mr. President, I wish to thank Mr. Peterson and Mr. Griffiths for their briefings, and I too would like to extend friendly greetings to Mr. Martin Griffiths and thank him warmly for everything he's done on the Syrian file, but also more generally I wish to thank him for his extraordinary contribution to the UN's work over the last few years. Allow me to make 3 points, if I may. It is to be lamented, first and foremost, that the Damascus regime obstinately continues to block all progress on the political process undertaken within the framework of Resolution 2254. It is within this framework that the international community stands ready to explore with the Syrian regime all prospects and possibilities likely to restore stability in Syria. The situation in that country is a source of instability for the region as a whole. Daesh is regrouping, we're seeing its resurgence, and we're seeing more drug trafficking, some of which is organized by the Syrian regime, and all of that jeopardizes regional security. Consequently, we call upon Damascus to reconsider its policy of obstruction. A just and lasting peace in Syria involves a political solution based on the implementation of Resolution 2254. In that connection, we support the efforts of Mr. Geir Peterson to successfully ensure the implementation of all facets of that resolution. If and only if progress is made, tangible progress is made in the political process, that we will be able to envisage lifting the sanctions we've imposed and financing reconstruction. The situation of refugees remains alarming. We support the countries hosting Syrian refugees, particularly Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon. We have supported the plan for Lebanon to the tune of €2 billion, and we particularly must support the UNHCR in neighbouring countries. Syrian refugees must be protected wherever they may be. Those who wish to return must be able to return in safe, dignified conditions. We will continue to support the UNHCR to prompt the Syrian regime to create conditions for a safe return with the necessary guarantees in full respect for international law. We must see Damascus revise its approach in order to alleviate the burden of host countries. The humanitarian situation continues to worsen. The extension of permissions for the crossing points of Bab el-Salam and Al-Rai is good news, as is the cross-line mission to the Aluk water station. We must provide humanitarian assistance via all means available to us. Financing continues to fall short of need. We remain mobilized, and that was the spirit that underpinned the 8th Conference for Syria that was held in Brussels. That led to the collection of €5 billion to alleviate the Syrian suffering. We have announced an additional pledge for €3 million.
The floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Special Envoy Peterson and USG Griffith for today's briefing. And I also join in expressing special thanks to USG Griffith for his dedication and tireless work on Syrian humanitarian questions. My delegation would also like to reiterate our full support to Special Envoy for his unwavering efforts to advance Syrian political process. However, it is regrettable that we are witnessing no progress in the security and political process in Syria. Armed conflict in the northwest and the northeast have been active. ISIL is continuing its attacks across the country. Recent intense exchange of fire over the Golan Heights has added additional concerns to the security horizon. This demonstrates Syria still has its own dynamics of conflict inside its territory. Besides these internal factors, external factors such as the catastrophe in Gaza and tensions along the Blue Line can further deteriorate the security situation in Syria. Above all, no country in the region is safe from the possibility of spillover until the conflict in Gaza is resolved. Regarding the political situation, it is also regrettable that no tangible progress has been seen so far. However, the Special Envoy's suggestion just before to hold a bridge meeting in Geneva ahead of the Constitutional Committee could be a good starter in implementing Resolution 2254. My delegation supports, again, the Special Envoy's endeavor and believes that holding the Constitutional Committee can lead to an inclusive and Syrian-led political process that meets the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people as stated in Resolution 2054. Mr. President, the economic and humanitarian situation in Syria is getting worse over time. Syria's malfunctioning economy is nearly in ruins, and summer is compounding the situation as a result of heat waves and intense storms. As USG Griffiths described in the briefing, Syria is heavily underfunded in terms of humanitarian assistance. But at the same time, you have to admit, undeniably, it is the current political situation in Syria that restricts humanitarian access and pose ongoing risks to humanitarian workers. In this connection, keeping cross-border operation open should not be hampered by the political dynamics, so that continuous provision of health, nutrition, protection, education, and other critical services will be delivered to the Syrian people. Mr. President, transcending this vicious cycle is both urgent and necessary. All key stakeholders, both inside and outside Syria, should be pragmatic, realistic, and tolerant of each other to catalyze progress in this direction. In this vein, we believe breakthrough like reconvening the Constitutional Commission will spur a transformation and create momentum forward. Lastly, let me reiterate, the comprehensive approach is both the line with Resolution 2254 as well as based on the aspirations of the international community, including the long-suffering Syrian people. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. And let me begin by thanking Special Envoy Pedersen and USG Griffiths for their briefings. And on this occasion, Malta too sincerely thanks you, USG Griffiths, for your exceptional leadership and principled approach to humanitarian action. It has been a guiding light for us in these times of global humanitarian need. President, the humanitarian crisis in Syria continues unabated. Hunger continues to stalk millions as we witness increased malnutrition in Homs, Hama, and Aleppo governorates, alongside water shortages in rural Aleppo. The Syrian economy is in freefall, and the value of the Syrian pound continues to crash. Inflation has eroded the modest purchasing power that few Syrians had to survive. The impact of the Red Sea crisis has driven up sea transportation costs, with goods now reaching Syria later and their prices higher than before. These factors and the 14 years of conflict in Syria have made the population more vulnerable to climate shocks. Heavy flooding in the winter months and drought in the summer compound humanitarian needs. They erode the resilience of already fragile communities and manifest in public health crises and outbreak of communicable diseases such as cholera. As Malta has noted on many occasions, Syria remains a grave protection crisis, with the impact of this protracted conflict being acutely felt by women, children, and older persons. In the northwest, mounting security threats mean many emergency obstetric and newborn care facilities have suspended their services. Gender-based violence remains pervasive, and child marriage on the rise. Within this context, Malta welcomes the extension of the border crossing points at Bab al-Salam and Al-Rai earlier this month. We reiterate, however, that all aid modalities must remain open for as long as they are required. Facilitating life-saving humanitarian aid must never form part of political negotiations. We must also see an expansion of cross-line aid delivery, funding for early recovery, livelihoods and resilience programming, and overall greater resources for the Syria Humanitarian Response Plan for 2024. As we welcome the outcome of the Brussels 8 conference, which we concluded earlier this week, and the pledge of some 8.1 billion US in grants and loans for Syrians. President, turning to the political side, Malta commends the work of the Special Envoy in seeking to resume the Constitutional Committee. We remain deeply disappointed, however, by the lack of engagement from Damascus. The time has come to set aside differences over the venue and to schedule and hold the next round of the Constitutional Committee. The status quo is untenable. Verifiable, reciprocal, and meaningful steps can break the political deadlock and spur progress. Making progress on the missing and those arbitrarily detained will showcase goodwill and good faith effort to draw this conflict to a resolution. Demonstrating progress in ensuring the protection and safety of returnees is also critical and paramount to creating the right conditions for safe, voluntary, and dignified returns of refugees. The rights of the Syrian refugees must be safeguarded. Now more than ever, it is essential to work towards advancing and implementing the political and humanitarian strategies required to place a floor under the suffering of the Syrian people, ensuring the millions in desperate need cannot fall any further. After 14 years of conflict, it is critical to resolve the root causes and issues of this conflict firmly and faithfully. As USG Griffiths just said, we cannot wait for the next cataclysm for the greater good to overcome the political deadlock. There is no more time to wait. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. I thank the Special Envoy Peterson and USG Griffiths for their briefings. And let me also add my country's sincere thanks to you, Mr. Griffiths, for all your work as Emergency Relief Coordinator, including in Syria. Mr. President, Slovenia remains deeply concerned about the ongoing spiral of violence in the Middle East. This has to stop before it pulls the whole region even further in the conflict of no return. We echo the Special Envoy's words, quote, "Syria is not a frozen conflict, nor are its effects felt only in Syria," end quote. We reiterate our call to all actors in the region, in Syria, and those who can exert influence on the parties to the conflict, to exert utmost restraint, to work towards de-escalation, and to respect international law, in particular international humanitarian and human rights law. I would like to make the following 3 remarks. First, we urge all actors in and out of Syria to act in good faith, to engage substantively without delay or excuse with a special envoy towards relaunching the Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process. Full, equal, meaningful and safe participation of all Syrian women in the process is highly important. As we've said it before, there is no military solution to the conflict in Syria, and only a resumption of a credible and viable political process in line with the Security Council Resolution 2254 could lead towards a much-needed nationwide ceasefire. Special Envoy enjoys our full support in this regard. Second, a resumption of political process is also essential for reversing the spiral of continued humanitarian and economic decline in Syria. OCHA's briefing today once again confirmed how critical the situation on the ground was and how urgently more help needed to be provided. Urgent response is needed when it comes to food, safe water, health, nutritional services, and access to schools, as well as protection of the vulnerable population, especially women and children. Unfortunately, Syria also provides a demonstration of the link between climate and the humanitarian development nexus. We have seen the devastating consequences of recent flooding and anticipate with concern the harmful effects of the approaching heat waves and water scarcity in the summer. Early recovery efforts to strengthen the resilience of the population to extreme weather events will be critical to limit the extent of the expected damages. Mr. President, we encourage not only to call for more of the critically needed aid for Syria, but also to commit to actual pledges so as to avoid the further closure of humanitarian programs and activities. In light of this, as some speakers have mentioned before, the European Union pledged over €2 billion for 2024 and 2025 at the AIDS 8th Brussels Conference on supporting the future of Syria and the region. This assistance will support both Syrians inside Syria and those in neighboring countries, as well as their host community in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. Considering the scale of humanitarian needs, we reiterate the importance of ensuring sustainable, predictable, and efficient aid flows, including cross-border and cross-line aid across the whole of Syria as long as needed. We reiterate that all parties must allow for and facilitate rapid, safe, and unimpeded passage of humanitarian aid to and through areas under their control. We emphasize the role of humanitarian workers, who must be able to work in safety and security. Implementation of Security Council resolutions and full respect of international law are therefore a key factor in ameliorating the humanitarian disaster. Third, advancement on political track could pave the way towards creating an environment conducive to the return of refugees and internally displaced persons. Conditions for their safe, dignified, and voluntary return are not met yet. We urge the government of Syria to do its part and effectively address the underlying causes and create the environment that would allow them to voluntarily return in safety and dignity. We commend Syria's neighboring countries for hosting a large number of Syrian refugees for over a decade while navigating their own challenges, including economic, and we encourage them to continue to do so. However, we are highly concerned about the reports of severe human rights violations and abuses against Syrian refugees in some places of Syria's neighboring countries, including arbitrary detention, torture, and forced deportations, violating the principle of non-refoulement in international law. This is unacceptable and has to stop, including through ensuring accountability and bringing the perpetrators to justice. Finally, Mr. President, people of Syria have suffered enough. A status quo is not in the interest of people of Syria, nor should it be in the interest of the government of Syria. It is high time to reinvigorate the political process. This is essential in moving towards a much-needed nationwide ceasefire for the people of Syria and the wider region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China. You have the floor.
President, I thank Special Envoy Patterson and USG Griffith for their briefings. I would like to take this opportunity to once again express our thanks to USG Griffith and my best greetings to you. President, China has always firmly supported a political solution to the Syrian issue, a political process based on the principle of Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, and the work of the Special Envoy Patterson in line with Council Resolution 2254. China welcomes the convening of the 33rd session of the Council of the League of Arab States and looks forward to enhanced communication and cooperation between the League, regional countries, and the Syrian government, thereby playing a constructive role in promoting a political solution. We support the necessary measures taken by the Syrian government in combating terrorism and call on the international community to combat all forms of terrorism in Syria with zero tolerance in accordance with the international law and the Security Council resolutions. China is deeply concerned about Israel's continued airstrikes on Syrian territory. Parties have to exercise restraint and avoid aggravating tensions. Extraterritorial powers should play a constructive role in cooling down the situation in the region. President, the current humanitarian situation in Syria remains grave. The international community should increase its assistance to Syria and ensure adequate, non-earmarked financial support to early recovery projects throughout the country. Over the past year, the UN and the Syrian government have maintained effective and smooth communication, and border crossings for aid delivery have been extended several times. China calls on parties concerned to provide active cooperation so as to make progress in cross-line relief efforts too. Unilateral sanctions and the plundering of resources have long impeded Syria's economic recovery, social development, and people's livelihoods, and should be ended without delay. We expect UN humanitarian agencies, including Resident Coordinator Office, to pay great attention to the negative impact of UCMs on the humanitarian situation in Syria and to report to the Security Council in a timely manner. We urge foreign forces to immediately end their illegal military presence in Syria. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. I wish to begin by thanking Special Envoy Peterson and Martin Griffiths, OCHA representative, for the information provided. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Martin Griffiths for his work at the helm of OCHA, for his humanitarian spirit and for the leadership that he's demonstrated. As has been repeatedly stated in recent months, Mr. President, the primary concern where Syria is concerned is the escalation of violence, which is a result of the intensity of hostilities in the region. Ecuador reaffirms its appeal to parties to exercise the utmost restraint and to reactivate sustained political dialogue. That is the only way of countering the destabilizing effects of the conflict in terms of the peace and security of the region. The ideal of a prosperous, stable and peaceful Syria in accordance with Resolution 2254 can only be achieved if there is a genuine intention to de-escalate the conflict, restore trust and resume the path of dialogue and political negotiation. Consequently, Special Envoy Peterson must continue his efforts to resume the meetings of the Constitutional Committee in order to establish confidence-building measures or set in place other initiatives which will make it possible to achieve a lasting political solution to the crisis in Syria. In the face of increasing hostilities, the humanitarian situation in Syria continues to worsen. Over the last month, UN teams have witnessed deaths, injured civilians, and seen the units providing humanitarian assistance being greatly affected. OCHA has warned that 16.7 million people, in other words 70% of the population, requires humanitarian assistance to survive. Moreover, the World Food Programme published a report stating that child malnutrition has tripled this year. And according to them, 13 million people are suffering food insecurity across the country. Ecuador is concerned about the situation of millions of Syrian people who have been forcibly displaced. We're worried by the extreme vulnerability of women and girls. At the same time, expectations for a safe, dignified and voluntary return are growing ever dimmer because of the political gridlock. The work of the Independent Institution on Missing Persons in Syria must forge ahead in order to provide answers about the fate of more than 100,000 missing persons. We must step up our fight against terrorism and violent extremism from a regional perspective and through joint work. Finally, it is vital to guarantee the access of humanitarian assistance unconditionally across the points of Bab al-Hawa, Bab al-Salam and Al-Raya. The permits for that expire in July and August, respectively. Thank you.
For their statement, I give the floor to the representative of Japan. You have the floor.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Peterson and USG Griffiths for their valuable briefings and tireless work. I would like to join other members of Council to sincerely thank USG Griffiths in person, although we might have another occasion to thank you over the camera. Today, unfortunately, the world needs OCHA so badly, but fortunately we had you to lead OCHA. Thank you. Mr. President, as the Syrian crisis enters its 14th year, the humanitarian situation is at its worst level yet. The number of refugees continues to rise. The economy continues to deteriorate. Basic infrastructure is extremely fragile. 9 in 10 people live in poverty, and there are no prospects for a political solution. as the Special Envoy often says, the status quo is untenable and will eventually lead to an explosion that risks further regional destabilization. Mr. President, Japan has continued its engagement with the Syrian government and other parties concerned, recognizing the importance of the following three pillars. First, advancing the political process in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2254. Second, fostering an environment conducive to the return of refugees. And third, strengthening cooperation with the international community. First, as noted by the Special Envoy, the political process is in serious jeopardy. We see a fundamental problem in the lack of trust between Syrian government and other key stakeholders. In this regard, the Syrian government should engage more constructively towards the resumption of the Constitutional Committee, which is the only platform for the opposition to participate in the political process. Second, the environment for a safe, dignified, and voluntary return of Syrian refugees is not in place as of today. The growing dissatisfaction with Syrian refugees in some neighboring countries is also a matter of great concern. We welcome the progress in discussions between the Syrian government and UNHCR on this matter. To this end, Japan will strengthen its assistance, including through community support, to contribute to the early return of refugees and IDPs. Third, a foundation of trust is essential to strengthen cooperation, and trust is built through a series of positive actions. We welcome the Syrian government's recent consent to extend the use of Bab al-Salam and Bar-Ai crossing. Bab al-Rai crossing. We highly value the effort of USG Griffiths and his team in this regard. Mr. President, with no political progress, aid fatigue has set in. We must commit ourselves to actual pledges and seek more efficient means of assistance, including through early recovery, support as highlighted at the recent 8th Brussels conferences. Also, the Syrian government must take further steps, including in the political process for the international community, to further strengthen its support to Syria. Japan, for its part, decided to provide additional early recovery assistance totaling approximately $25 million this year. Our assistance includes medical care, education, and water and sanitation, and is based on a whole of Syria approach across a wide range of areas, regardless of whether they are under government or non-government control. Mr. President, Japan, as a responsible Council member, continues to make its utmost effort through engaging with the Syrian government and other parties to resolve this long-standing crisis in accordance with Resolution 2254. The people of Syria deserve no less. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen for his briefing, and let me pay tribute in particular to USG Griffiths for his leadership and his efforts to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people over many years. We are in the 14th year of this conflict, so let me make three broad points about the changes we need to see. First, 1 year on from Syria's readmission to the League of Arab States, we've seen no real change in the regime's behaviour. Not on human rights violations, not on the safety of civilians, and not on creating the conditions for the safe, dignified, voluntary return of refugees. What's more, captagon flows have continued to increase, threatening the stability of the region. And Daesh attacks are increasing. We call on the Syrian regime to respond to the positive overtures of our Arab partners by changing its behaviour. Second, we continue to respond to the devastating humanitarian crisis. This week, the UK and other donors met in Brussels to pledge our support to the Syrian people. The UK is proud to have committed up to $264 million in humanitarian assistance this year, bringing our total funding to over $5 billion since the crisis began. This aid will be delivered to communities across Syria and includes $43.7 million for early recovery. We are stepping up our humanitarian funding, and we call on others to do the same. We also call on the regime to grant cross-border access for as long as is required based on humanitarian needs. We note the renewal of permissions earlier this month for aid to cross through 2 border points. However, as others have said, these short-term and last-minute extensions by the regime mean access is still unpredictable. Since needs are higher than ever in Syria, humanitarians need to be able to reach people in a predictable, principled and cost-effective way. The 3 remaining UN border crossing points are a critical lifeline, and humanitarian agencies need safe access to reach populations in need. Finally, President, the only long-term solution to ending this conflict is through the UN-led political process based on Resolution 2254. We reiterate our support to your efforts, Special Envoy, and we call on the parties to cooperate fully towards delivering a lasting political settlement in Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of United Kingdom for their statement. The representative of Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It would be disrespectful to leave a direct question from the United States Permanent Representative unanswered. We will leave the remark about who is throwing stones from glass houses without comment, and instead we will focus on today's agenda. Our country is actively working to rebuild Syria, whose destruction was brought about by the actions of the occupying armed forces that are on Syria's territory illegally. I would like to once again emphasize that the Russian armed forces are in the Syrian Arab Republic at the invitation of the Syrian side. In addition, we are supplying humanitarian aid to the population of this long-suffering country through both bilateral and multilateral channels. We're providing assistance, including financial assistance, for the implementation of development programs. The Syrians, the receiving beneficiary side, are well aware of these activities because when providing assistance, it is important to take the priorities of the recipient of that assistance into account. Let me cite a few examples. Thanks to our efforts made in cooperation with the Syrian authorities, to date, more than 2 million Syrian citizens have been able to return to their homes. Of them, more than 1,375,000 are internally displaced persons. More than 1 million are refugees from abroad. Since 2020, in various regions of the country, there are facilities that have been repaired and put into operation. More than 22,000 facilities of social and industrial significance, and another 4,000 facilities are currently undergoing construction work. To support agricultural producers, 11 new cooperative farms have been set up in the governorates of Aleppo, Latakia, Tartus, Dara, and Suwaida. Concessional lending programs have been launched in the country, and in Deir ez-Zor Governorate, we have put a central irrigation station into operation, which has allowed to bring some 7,500 hectares of agricultural lands back into use. In addition, in the governorates of Damascus, Deir ez-Zor, and Homs, there are 921 housing projects that are currently being completed. We're also working to preserve Syria's cultural and historical heritage. We're referring to the work of representatives of the Center for Rescue Archaeology of the Institute for the History of Material Culture of the Russian Academy of Science, and the Directorate General of Antiquities and Museums of Syria. In conclusion, we're supporting the efforts of the legitimate Syrian authorities, whom unfortunately some delegations unjustifiably refer to as a regime, efforts to create conditions for peaceful life in the country, rather than supporting terrorists whose attacks continue to kill civilians. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Syrian Arab Republic. You have the floor, sir.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. اسمح لي أن أبدأ. Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you and the friendly delegation of Mozambique for your successful presidency of the Council this month. I've listened carefully and attentively to the two briefings, and I would like to express to USG Martin Griffiths for our extreme gratitude and thanks and appreciation for the efforts that he has exerted during his term and mandate. We at the government of Syria, we look forward to continue our collaboration with your successor and with OCHA to continue building on the positive steps that have achieved to this date according to the principles and standards of a humanitarian work as provided for in the UN General Assembly Resolution 46/182. Away from politicizations, negations, and dictations. Mr. President, the government of Syria continues its constructive collaboration and cooperation with the United Nations and its agencies that are operating in Syria and offers them all facilities needed in order to enable them to deliver on their mandates and also to contribute to the alleviation of the suffering of Syrians and to improve the humanitarian and the living standards situations in Syria. On this note, I would like to highlight the following updates. First of all, the government of Syria has approved OCHA's request to extend the license given to UN to use Bab al-Salama and al-Ra'i crossings for 3 additional months to expire on August 13, 2024. All of that in order to facilitate the access of the humanitarian assistance to those who most need them among the Syrian civilians in the northwest areas of Syria. This means that we have 5 crossings that are operating through which the UN can operate through. 3 are cross borders, i.e. Bab al-Salama, Bab al-Hawa, and al-Ra'i, and 2 of them are cross lines, namely Saraqib and Sarmada. We have taken note of OCHA's decisions to launch the UNHIU, which is the United Nations Humanitarian Inspection Unit, to replace the monitoring mechanism whose mandate has expired. But because of our, we still have many concerns about the cross-border mechanisms are still valid, and that's why we need to stress times and again that all humanitarian access needs to be directed to their true beneficiaries among Syrian civilians not to to be sent to terrorist entities and their affiliates that literally take over those assistance or divert them in order to finance their terrorist criminal activities and to buy loyalty of others. Secondly, the government of Syria has issued approvals to OCHA a number of times to allow convoys of assistance across the lines from Halab to Sarmada in the northwest Syria. But the terrorist organizations are preventing the convoy from access to this area. And this is not new. In the post-earthquake period, the government of Syria and the UN and the Syrian Red Crescent and a number of partners and donors have exerted many efforts to send convoys across lines. And they have to wait for in lines for days. And the terrorist entities denied them access. And many of the representatives of the donor agencies from Europe and from other Arab states, from partners and from the UN agencies, they've seen it hands-on directly with their own eyes. And also the government of Syria had also issued a number of approvals to the United Nations in order to deliver assistance to northeast Syria, Tal Abyad namely. And we are following up on the matter of issuing more approvals in this regard to get everything done. Thirdly, just like what happened in the previous years, the government of Syria has exerted its utmost efforts to enable students residing in the areas controlled by the terrorist entities and militias in the northwest and northeastern areas of Syria. We enable them to leave those terrorist-controlled areas in order to sit for the final high school yearly exam, and that are taking place right now. I mean, the final exams, so that we will avoid undermining their academic future. Although with the diminishing financing through UNICEF and the WFP as a result of the shortages and the shortfall in funding and assistance, in spite of all of that, thousands of students with their parents have been well received, supported as should be in the centers launched to host them, whereas the terrorist organization in Idlib prevented the exit of thousands of students that are being held hostage by them as human shields in the areas controlled by those terrorist entities, because simply those terrorist entities are against knowledge, against scholarly work, against learning, but rather they want for ignorance and backwardness and extremism to prevail. With the assistance, regrettably, of some Western countries. Fourthly, the government of Syria is cooperating with the Lebanese authorities in order to facilitate the voluntary return of hundreds of Syrian refugees from Lebanon. The government of Syria shall continue such collaboration, although some are trying to undermine and criticize this process by spreading hearsay and making unfounded allegations. Fifthly, within the framework of the continuous efforts by the government of Syria for the rule of law and the principles of justice, the Ministry of Interior in Syria has issued stringent instructions that would emphasize observing and respecting the statutory periods when it comes to detention and investigation, and to avoid longer periods of detention, say for serious criminal cases, and to avoid all abuses of the detainees that are in violation of Article 53 of the Constitution and Law number 1622 on the criminalization of torture. And also we have applied a number of guarantees to prevent any harm to the innocent, and also to ensure the rights of the detainees by duly informing their families of their whereabouts. A couple of days ago, Mr. President, the so-called 8th Brussels Conference for the Future of Syria and the region, with the participation of actors that are directly engaged in terrorist activities to spread chaos, killing and destruction in my country. And as usual, pledges were made, but not many of them will be fulfilled. And so far, only 9% of those pledges in 2024 have been met, and we are almost halfway through this year. Tomorrow will be starting in June, or the day after, which really shows that such commitments and pledges and whatever is being announced in terms of commitments and pledges in Brussels are mainly only for PR work, and they will never deliver on them. And of course, whatever funding is provided should not be always coupled with the so-called earmarked funding as a part of a discriminatory policy, nor should it be restricted to areas that are controlled by the terrorist militias and organizations in the northeastern and northwestern parts of Syria, and would deny it in a discriminatory manner and in an inhuman way from other millions of Syrians. And of course, the outcomes and the findings of the conference reflect the disregard of the actors in the EU as called for by 8 European countries to reassess and re-evaluate the European policies, the erroneous European policies, and to adopt new approaches. This conference has actually adopted a very strange position that calls for the non-return of the refugees, although the enabling environment is ready. And this has been preceded by making an announcement that there are plans by those countries to fund programs to keep those refugees where they are and to prevent them from reaching Europe. I believe that such pledges should have been made to provide funding for the programs that would enable the dignified, safe return of refugees and to improve their standards of living, to provide services and key basic needs, which requires the immediate, unconditional removal of all UCMs and the collective punishment policies as applied by the US administration and the EU against all Syrians, prompting them to go through the perilous journey across the Mediterranean, where they die on the way as they have to become refugees to look for a job opportunity. The Bahrain Declaration, issued by the Arab League Summit on 16th of May this year, called for creating the enabling environment of a safe, dignified return for the Syrians, including the removal of all UCMs against Syria. In this regard, we reiterate our call to issue the study and the review related to the impact of the UCMs on the humanitarian work in Syria, a study which the Western countries are preventing to release. And we would like to ask the UN Secretariat to instruct its regional offices to release the findings as soon as possible. Mr. President, the government of Syria would like to emphasize and reiterate that restoring security and stability and improving of the humanitarian conditions would necessitate fighting terrorism and putting an end to the illegitimate, illegal military presence on the Syrian territory, and to put an end to all that is associated and affiliated with that, including attacks, aggressions, and supporting of terrorist organizations and the looting of national wealth and resources. And also we need to restore the rule of law and the control of the state across all Syrian territory and land, and to put an end to the suffering of Syrians that are brought about by the embargo, blockade, and economic terrorism policies, with their devastating impact covering every single aspect of Syrians' daily life. I have just received the correction that I refer to Article 53 of the Charter, but actually it's 53 of the Constitution, as said previously, according to the instructions by the Ministry of Interior released recently. So the reference is correct. Mr. President, Syria reiterates its commitment to a Syrian-led and owned political process without any foreign intervention, and under the principle of complete respect for its sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is the very basic principle as provided for by the relevant UN resolutions, as also reiterated by the 10th Cooperation Sino-Arab Cooperation Forum that's being held in China with the participation of Syria. And therefore, And therefore, Syria holds responsible the other actors and their sponsors for impeding the efforts to resume the 9th round of the operation of the Constitutional Committee in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. And therefore, Syria reiterates that the UN and the Security Council should rise to the occasion and shoulder its responsibility to put an end to all the massacres that are being perpetrated by the authorities of the Israeli occupation against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and all other attempts to explode the situation in the region by expanding the area of their aggressions in other countries in the region, including the Syrian cities of Banyas yesterday, that led to the martyrdom of a number of citizens. One of them is a young female child. This would not have happened had it not been for the blind, full support of the U.S. and West support to Israel and the policies of hypocrisy and double standards. Mr. President, with regards to the situation at Al-Rukban IDP camp that has previously indicated by the U.S. delegate, we would like to say that the primary entity responsible for the suffering is the U.S. occupation, which occupies a 10th area where Al-Rukban is located, where there are terrorist organizations, including Maghawir, the Revolutionary Commandos terrorist organization, as it is designated. And you can imagine that the one who is in control of that so-called 55 square kilometers area is capable to provide support, weapons, training, planning, and logistics to the terrorist organization. But that entity, they're talking about humanitarian difficulties for some persons there, which shows that the U.S. administration is providing weapons and support to the terrorists and would like to make use of any suffering in order to attack the Syrian government. As with regards to what she said about the right of the Syrian people to be free of from suffering that is now going on for 13 years. We would like to reiterate and emphasize that this starts well by stopping the destructive U.S. policies and to the immediate unconditional removal of all UCMs and the economic terrorism that is being exercised by the U.S. administration against the Syrian people and other peoples alike. And also they should stop looting our Syrian oil and natural resources. The colleague, the permanent representative of the United States, said that the U.S. has donated or pledged $590 million during the Brussels conference, and some other representatives of the Western countries, especially the permanent ones, alluded to similar figures. But the three of them failed to tell us about the amount of damage caused by the illegal coalition and the U.S., British, and French aggressions, and the Israeli and the cost of the Israeli aggressions, the UCMs supporting terrorism, looting Syrian wealth. You did not tell us about the cost of that and the damage as a result on the Syrian economy, which is estimated in billions of dollars. That's why my country has officially sent communique and official letters to the Security Council and Secretary General indicating that the hydrocarbon sector has incurred losses as a result of the U.S. aggressions and the daily looting of the oil products, and as a result of the illegal coalition that is formed under the pretext of fighting terrorism, has reached something to the excess of $120 billion. So what aid are you talking about? The U.S. Sanctions are killing civilians, preventing refugees and IDPs from returnees, and deny Syrians hope, and forces them to migrate and to become refugees, just like the bombs that you provide to the Israeli occupation authorities, so that they use them to bomb the civilians in Gaza, to kill them, force them into displacement, and to empty those areas from their lawful residence. Mr. President, some alluded to the elections to be organized by the U.S.-backed agents in northeastern Syria. The so-called alleged elections are likewise illegitimate, illegal, because they are backed by the U.S. force, and therefore they are null and void if they are held. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, Mr. President, we congratulate you on both assuming the Security Council presidency this month and successfully managing the Council. We thank Mr. Peterson, the Special Envoy, and Mr. Griffiths, the Under Secretary General, for their briefing. As this is the final briefing of Mr. Griffiths, we join others in expressing our sincere gratitude to his efforts and leadership. Mr. President, the humanitarian and economic situation in Syrian Arab Republic remains dire, and the Syrian people suffer from profound economic challenges. After 13 years of conflict, as the UN report indicates, the humanitarian community faces its most challenging funding landscape. The humanitarian response plan for 2024 is only 8% funded, significantly less at this time than last year. The continuance of the destructive policy of unilateral sanction exacerbates the plight of the most vulnerable segments of the society and serves only to prolong the crisis and worsen the suffering endured by the Syrian population. Unfortunately, Western countries have ignored the dire situation on the ground and continue to pursue their political agenda at all costs. They utilize sanctions as a tool to achieve their objective, even at the expense of ordinary people who suffer as a result. Due to the complex and extensive nature of unilateral sanctions, the alleged humanitarian exemption often prove ineffective and pointless. We welcome the sovereign decision of the Syrian government to renew the permission granted to the United Nations and its specialized agencies to use the Bab al-Salam and Al-Rai crossing for an additional 3 months until 13 August 2024 to deliver humanitarian aid to civilians in northwest Syria. We hope this support will ensure sufficient and predictable funding and the donors will fulfill their pledges. We commend the tireless efforts of UN agencies and humanitarian partners in their work toward alleviating the suffering of the Syrian people. However, preventing the diversion of aid to terrorist organizations in the northwest region and ensuring transparent and non-discriminatory distribution of aid are essential aspects that need careful consideration. We also emphasize the need for unhindered humanitarian access through cross-line routes and in full coordination with the Syrian government. Providing immediate aid is crucial. However, it is not a sustainable solution in long term. Efforts must focus on rebuilding critical infrastructure to create conditions for the safe return of refugees and internally displaced persons. Given the burden that neighboring countries, particularly Lebanon, have carried during the crisis, the return of refugees and internally displaced people to their respective homes in Syria should not be politicized or used as leverage against the Syrian government. Mr. President, as we have said time and again, the conflict in the Syrian Arab Republic cannot be resolved without upholding the full sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the country. The restoration of Syria's territorial integrity demands relentless efforts to combat all terrorist groups without interruption. It is imperative, however, that the protection of civilians remains paramount throughout counter-terrorism efforts. Mr. President, Iran remains committed to a political resolution of the situation in Syria and will continue supporting a truly Syrian-led, Syrian-owned, UN-facilitated political processes, as well as assisting the people and government of Syria to restore the unity and territorial integrity of their country. As we have said, the resumption of the meeting of the Constitutional Committee as an effective mechanism for advancing the political process in Syria is necessary. In this context, we remain committed in our support of the Special Envoy's effort and his engagement with all parties. Furthermore, along with the Astana format partners, we are committed to working toward long-term and sustainable normalization in and around Syria. Mr. President, the Israeli occupying regime continues its acts of aggression against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, targeting civilians and vital infrastructure. We strongly condemn these unlawful actions as provocative actions that violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, the UN Charter and international law, and serve only to escalate tensions and undermine stability in Syria and the region. Despite repeated appeals from the Syrian Arab Republic, the Security Council has failed to take any action in response to these illegal actions, not even condemning them. The recent massacre of displaced people of Gaza in Rafah camp by this regime on 26 May has once again demonstrated that the Israeli crossed all red lines, blatantly violated international humanitarian law, basic principles of international law, the UN Security Council resolutions, and disregarded the legally binding ICJ's order. All those violations were carried out with full impunity and fully supported by the United States. The international community, and in particular the Security Council, as the main organ responsible for maintenance of the international peace and security, remain mere observers of these gross violations. We urgently call on the Security Council to abandon its policy of appeasement and take decisive and urgent action to hold Israel accountable, compelling it to stop its military aggression immediately. Finally, Mr. President, we reject the allegation made by the representative of the U.S. at this meeting. U.S. tried to deny the responsibility for the current situation in Syria and the broad region by falsely blaming Iran. They claim to support civilians and uphold humanitarian law, yet they persist with their failed policies against Syria, using sanctions as tools at the expense of ordinary people. Iran has always been a positive part of regional developments, treading the path of stabilizing peace and lasting security, including the fight against terrorism in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am also grateful to Special Envoy Pedersen and Under Secretary General Griffiths for their briefings, even it is the last one in person. Mr. President, through its unanimously adopted resolution 2254, this Council reiterated years ago that the only sustainable solution to the conflict is through a political process, which should meet the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. Yet, in this 14th year, the prospects of a lasting political solution remains elusive. The rise of other large-scale crises should not diminish our attention to Syria, as economic, security, and humanitarian aspects of the crisis continue to deteriorate. The status quo is not sustainable. A re-energized focus on Syria is needed. The ground should be prepared to address the root causes of the crisis. This requires, first and foremost, a change of attitude on side of the Syrian regime to initiate genuine national reconciliation. It is clear that nothing will move to a positive direction in Syria without the revitalization of the political process on the basis of Security Council Resolution 2254. As we repeatedly point out, convening the 9th round of the Constitutional Committee as soon as possible and with tangible results is crucial to this end. Current deadlock and indeed obstructions pose a danger not only to the political track but also to the other aspects of the crisis, whereas making progress in the political process would contribute to the solution of the problems on other tracks as well, like economy and migration. In this regard, creation of the conditions for the voluntary, safe and dignified return of Syrians should be part of all efforts to resolve the crisis. The Syrian regime must assume its primary responsibility in this regard. Improvement of the economic conditions itself are not enough. There is also a governance issue there. Similarly, international community should actively support efforts towards this goal, I mean return of refugees, without externalizing the issue, including through supporting the stabilization efforts in northwest Syria. Mr. President, unimpeded, sustained and predictable delivery of life-saving aid, as well as adequate and sustainable humanitarian funding are critical of a holistic approach we need to effectively address the Syrian conflict. Accordingly, we have the right to expect the continued use of 3 available border crossings for cross-border aid deliveries to Syria as long as humanitarian needs continue. The Security Council should continue to remain closely engaged. On the other hand, the significant drop in the humanitarian funding is deeply concerning, especially at a time when the number of people in need of humanitarian aid has reached a record almost 17 million. The UN agencies and their humanitarian partners need predictability and sustainability not only in the access but also in the funding. We call on donors to scale up their contributions for the UN Syria Humanitarian Response Plan, which is currently funded only around 8%. We also reiterate that the United Nations whole of Syria approach has formed the backbone of the humanitarian response to the crisis and call for an appropriate appointment without further delay to the position of the regional humanitarian coordinator for Syria crisis. Mr. President, regarding the water disruption in Alluk water station, the reasons behind the problem are not new and indeed well known to the whole UN agencies. This station operates on electrical power coming from Derbasia transformer. The disruption of electricity supply from Derbasia transformer, which is under control of PKK, terrorist organization, impedes the proper functioning of the Alluk station. In addition to regular cross-line maintenance missions to the station in the past, most recently, on 21st of May, UNICEF, along with ICRC, paid another technical visit to Alluk water station. We believe that providing regular flow of electricity to this station, to Alluk station, through alternative resources will secure a long-term solution. On the other hand, the breakdown at Ain al-Beida water station also results in water shortages for almost 200,000 people in the city of El Bab. We hope the restoration work initiated at Ain al-Bedia water station should be completed before the start of the summer, before the start of the dry season. Mr. President, the separatist and disruptive agenda of the terrorist organization, namely PKK, YPG, SDF, as well as its grave violations, repression, and attacks against the local population continue unabated in Syria. Burning the local offices by PKK, SDF are clear signs. Also, the reactions by the local tribes in the resort area are other evidences. After establishing institutions on the basis of so-called social covenant and creating a so-called court to monitor its implementation, this terrorist organization is now preparing to hold local elections next month. It is crystal clear that this endeavor is in complete contravention of the territorial integrity and unity of Syria, and supporting this endeavor means acting against Resolution 2254. We continue to strongly emphasize that PKK-YPG SDF has no place in Syria's future and urge all sides to disengage from this terrorist organization whose only objective is to advance its own separatist agenda, not Syria, not Syrian people, not international community. Mr. President, the conflict in Syria continues to pose a serious threat to peace and security in the region and well beyond. Millions of Syrians continue to suffer grave humanitarian repercussions. This Council has set out the pathway to a lasting solution to this conflict with the Resolution 2254. It is now high time that all sides take necessary steps to implement it. Turkey will continue to support international efforts to achieving a lasting settlement. In conclusion, Mr. President, I appreciate almost all members of the Council focused on the meeting of the Constitutional Committee, which is an essential element of the political process. I wish all sides will take it seriously and will give up the obstructionist policies. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for their statement. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement, and I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize for taking the floor, but I need to respond to comments made by the representative of the Syrian regime. Just to push back on a number of these falsehoods. The U.S. has a presence, military presence in Syria for one reason and one reason only, and that's to fight ISIS. We've been very clear about this for quite some time. That is the only reason we are there. The charge that the U.S. is looting Syrian property and oil resources, this is out of the Syrian playbook. It's absolute nonsense. The U.S. is not looting Syrian property or seizing its oil resources. Let's not forget, Syria has killed thousands upon thousands of its own people since the war began in 2013. It's used chemical weapons against its own people, as has been stated by the OPCW many times. So these are not just ridiculous charges, these are facts. They have tortured their own people. They have sent their people into internal displacement. They've become refugees in other countries. So the regime continues to carry out a war against its own people. And that is why Syrians don't want to return home. No amount of lies, no distortions, no propaganda can change that reality. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. The representative of the Syrian Arab Republic has asked for the floor to make a further statement, and I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will not speak at length. 8 months of genocide in Gaza, and the U.S. position in the Security Council and the use of the veto by the U.S. 5 times to shield Israel and to prevent an end to the massacres and the genocide and to prevent the delivery of aid and to prevent attempts of forced displacement of Palestinians. All this can very simply uncover the true face of the practices of the U.S. administration and its approach towards the Middle East region, which always is completely and blindly biased towards Israel. And they have no red lines in the service of Israel and in destabilizing neighboring areas and regions. Mr. President, We have noted the repeated use of the veto by the US, which undermines any credibility for those allegations of the representatives of the US administration. And you all recall that after so many efforts in this Council, Resolution 2728 was adopted, which calls for a ceasefire and a humanitarian pause in the occupied territory. What was the American response to the resolution? It was the immediate statement, and before going back to our offices, that this is a non-binding resolution and that this resolution does not include any additional commitments on the parties. This is the U.S. position. This is the position of the U.S. administration. The U.S. administration takes resolutions that need that are problematic, that serve their interests. They take them out of the history books. And when this Council adopts a resolution to end the massacres and the genocide, they say that this is a non-binding resolution, and they decide to continue to provide Israel with weapons and smart bombs, as they claim, and these bombs are exactly as their sanctions that are smart sanctions and targeted sanctions. All this is for the killing of civilians and entrenching the economic terrorism and towards destabilizing the region by the U.S. administration. All other allegations set forth by the representative of the U.S. administration are with no value.
The Syrian Arab Republic for their statement. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. Well, this will be, after this we are going to close the meeting, but I give them the floor, and then after that I will close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Once again, apologize for taking the floor, but it was just actually to pose a question. I believe this session is supposed to be about the situation in Syria, correct?
Yes.
That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite Council members to informal consultation to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.